will we will start with a panel discussion, which will focus on the global and regional economic implications mostly.
Level to what has been happening the last 5-6 years in Turkey.
Thank you for the compact and enlightening discussion. When we scheduled today's event, Trump and Harris were neck and neck in the presidential race, but we obviously bore in mind that the Trump presidency would be anything but boring. His landslide victory in a divided America and a highly polarized climate is not just the culmination of the consolidation of his political presence, given that he is the first US president in 180 years to be elected to 2 non-consecutive terms. If I'm not mistaken, he's also the first post-war candidate who in his second run, after his first term, got more votes, about 5 million more, than he did in the elections he won in 2016. And it is an interesting discussion as to how Trump managed initially to take over, to put it mildly, the Republican Party and subsequently winning Democratic strongholds, taking all 7 swing states. But what's even more interesting for us to look at, with a high degree of precarity, I must stress, is the impact of his return to the international stage in both the geopolitical and economic spheres. So we discussed about the latter. Regarding the former, I think we have the ideal person in Greece to debate and analyze the facts we have in our hands so far. Mr. Dένdias served successfully as Minister of Foreign Affairs. He is now, for a second time, Minister of Defense. And with his great experience and knowledge, he will help us see whether our world, where our world is heading, and how the next US administration can impact Greece's position and our relations with Turkey. So I have divided our discussion, Mr. Dένdias, into 3 parts. The first is Trump and the world. And I'm going to start with my first question. Trump seemed indifferent to international institutions and agreements during his first term. If he drops out of international agreements or keeps ignoring UN mechanisms, how will this affect the current global order?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure. You will allow me just to start with a different remark on your question before. I was asked where I entered. Have you been here before? Meaning the college. And I have been here before, I think quite many times. And it was one of the most interesting occasions in my life because I'm an alumni of Athens College. At that time, Athens College was a boys' school. And this was a girls' school. And we had 2 parties per year with the girls. So that's how I started coming here. And I remember it very fondly. So thank you for inviting me again after all these years. Now, let's get serious on the Trump issues. When I became Minister of Defense last year, I asked one question on a think tank, an informal think tank that sometimes advises me. What if President Trump wins the next elections, and what if his first act is to get out of NATO? Where would Greece stand? How would Greece react? Of course, nobody was expecting, nobody is expecting President Trump to leave NATO. But yet again, I would like to underline what your questions tell us, that we are expecting an approach rather different than the one we have been used to at least the last 4 years on the issues of the international institutions, be it NATO, being the United Nations, etc., etc., etc. Well, a simple answer would be we cannot foresee a Trump presidency, and it would be wrong to try to foresee. The right answer for us, Greece, and I'm speaking from our angle, is to keep our course, to keep really presenting to the United States a kind of argumentation that tells to the United States not that we are right, but explain to the United States why it is to their interest to support what we believe also is right for us. In a way, Trump being a transactional politician and I assume a transactional entrepreneur as well, understands that kind of argumentation. Not argumentation based on human rights, on the United Nations Charter, on the law of the sea, etc., etc. I assume, I've only had the opportunity to meet President Trump once with Prime Minister Mitsotakis on a meaningful discussion. All the others were Dutch listening to him. But I assume that that is going to be his approach this time, and my advice to my government and in my ministry is to prepare ourselves for such a kind of argumentation in our relations with the United States after January the 20th.
Good. Thank you for that. It was discussed in the previous panel about European defense, so I'm wondering whether Europe is prepared to take a bigger share of responsibility for European security, and also who's going to pay the price?
Yeah. Well, let me be frank. Europe is totally unprepared. That's the honest truth. Let me give you an example. We're not a big power. We're a mid-sized country with a mid-sized defense budget, 11 million population. We have more heavy tanks than Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg combined. Combined. And that's a simple way to put it, because, for example, countries like the Netherlands, with a GDP 4-5 times our own, does not have even one heavy armored vehicle. Not even one. It is clear that Europe, after the Berlin Wall fall apart, thought that we will live in peace and stability forever. And they were not prepared to address today's reality. But then comes the second oxymoron. We do recognize, everybody in Brussels, everybody in the European capitals, Professor Fields, recognizes that we are not ready. And yet again, although everybody says that rearming is a top priority, the budgetary limits stay as they are. There is only a clause that says, yeah, if you overshoot, if you go over, then we may discuss it. But for countries like Greece, we're not France, we're not Spain. If Greece goes over the budgetary limits, then our interest rates will go to the roof. And even after 2 years, the European Union accepts that we were right in going over, it will make no difference, it will make no sense at all. So practically, there is nothing we can do to speed up our rearmament in Europe, regardless of the challenges we're facing. And I have to say also, on that, President Trump, in his previous presidency, was totally right. The manner was rather awkward, but what he was saying made sense. The United States taxpayer was paying for the defense of Europe. That was what was happening.
By the way, following what you just said, if I'm not mistaken, the US contributes something between 70 to 75% of NATO's budget?
70.
So, presumably, I mean, we both agree that they're not going to withdraw from NATO. But if they decide to dial down their commitment or reduce their economic contribution, how can we sustain NATO's cohesion?
Well, again, there are two angles in which we should see that. The NATO angle and the European angle, which partly is the Greek angle. NATO angle, what needs to happen is for all the countries, the other countries, to raise their budgets, some of them dramatically. For example, the Federal Republic. 3 years ago, Chancellor Scholz proclaimed that a new era will start for the German armed forces, huge armament programs, etc., etc. Nothing to be seen as up to date. I assume he will not achieve it in the last 2 months of his chancellorship, because they have elections sometime mid-January, mid-February. So these countries have to raise substantially, not just the expenditure, it's much more than that. It has to be a cultural change. The countries in Europe and in NATO, or at least most of them, have to understand that peace is something that needs protection. In order to live peacefully, and you have to be able to defend yourself. You cannot get a free ticket on this. Now, as far as the European Union and Greece are concerned, for the European Union, I totally subscribe to President Macron's approach that Europe needs a defense arm. We cannot proclaim, as President von der Leyen did, Europe being a geopolitical actor, and at the same time, Europe cannot project any kind of serious power anywhere, not even in the East Mediterranean. The European Union has two important military activities on the sea. The one is called Irini, which is north of Libya. I'm saying that as an example. And the second one is Aspides in the Red Sea. Both of them have a Greek name. You can guess why. Because we, small Greece, initiated both of them. And we contribute assets to both of them. And there are only 4 more European countries contributing assets. For some northern and much richer countries, this is irrelevant, and even worse, some of them cannot even project power as far as the East Mediterranean. So we need to create a defense arm for the European Union. Greece, my last remark. I have to be honest. We have to be able to defend ourselves. We do have allies, we do have friends, but in the end of the day, we have to be able to defend ourselves even alone. That's the ticket to survival.
Well, I will turn now to our neighborhood and the wider region. President-elect Trump, has declared his willingness to end the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. What is the most realistic scenario for both cases? And can Greece contribute to an extent to the stabilization, given its, especially in the Middle East, solid partnership with Israel and traditional ties with the Arab world?
I will start with Ukraine. Well, the truth is easier said than done. The best one could hope in Ukraine is freezing the conflict where it is and leave the matters that have to do with sovereignty, territorial integrity, to discuss in the fullness of time. There are no easy solutions now in Ukraine. I do believe that if there is a plan in President Trump's mind, it has to be something like that. Of course, that will have an enormous impact. Freezing that conflict will have an enormous impact on Europe and on Greece. Apart from all the catastrophes brought to Europe from the Russian invasion in Ukraine, I will underline a small profit, which is not really small, it's much more than that. The realization by NATO and the United States of the usefulness of Western thrust, and especially the port of Alexandroupolis. The port of Alexandroupolis is closer to Odessa than any other route, for example. And regardless of what will happen on this conflict, NATO and the United States will always need the port of Alexandroupolis and Western thrust in order to be able to communicate with Central and Eastern Europe and Ukraine.
So even if Ukraine is solved, you don't see any issue of, let's say, possible liberation of the port of Alexandroupolis?
No, I believe that will remain as it is. And that was put in the first agreement I had the honor to sign with Secretary Pompeo in the first Trump administration. That was the first time that Alexandroupolis was mentioned in a treaty between Greece and the United States. And I have to say, we were proven right after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Middle East is a different thing. We know where President Trump's heart lies. He has given us clear indication from his past presidency. Also, we have to appreciate something else on which, again, we were right geopolitically. We have in our mind the old idea of a conflict between Israel and the Arab world. That is not there anymore. And it was manifested through the Abraham Accords that that is not there anymore. There is a totally different realignment. There is a realignment of Iran and its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and a realignment of Israel and a number of conservative Arab countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. These countries do not like what's happening in Gaza, are not happy with the victims, but yet again, it is clear that they share the political objective of crushing Hamas and crushing Hezbollah. So Greece has an advantage because we have very close relations with Israel and very close relations with these conservative Arab countries. We have a treaty, a defense treaty, allow me to tell you, with the UAE. We have a treaty with Egypt, which you know, and we have a very good understanding with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So I think we are well placed.
By the way, Trump is about to nominate a pastor as U.S.'s ambassador to Israel. Yeah. He's not very friendly to the Palestinians, so this is highly indicative of his intentions. Some in Greece, Mr. Dένdias, fear the personal relationship between Trump and Erdogan. I think they exaggerate. So Greek-American ties are tight, strategic, and consistent. But as you said before, Trump is operating, is functioning in a transactional way, and he's negotiating actually in a transactional way, and he has a transactional way of thinking. So how can we ensure that our bilateral ties will not be negatively affected?
With the United States, you mean?
Yes.
Well, first of all, what we don't like, there is a relation between President Trump and President Erdogan. That is there. And there's a personal relation. I'll tell you how I know. We were in a NATO meeting with Prime Minister Mitsotakis, heads of state. I was foreign minister, I was accompanying him. President Trump was chairing the meeting. But there was a scheduled meeting between Prime Minister Mitsotakis and President Erdogan. That was in London, in the NATO summit in London. And as the time was approaching, Prime Minister Mitsotakis says to President Trump, "I'm sorry, Mr. President, but we have to go, we have a meeting with President Erdogan." And President Trump tells us, "Okay, guys, do go. He's a friend of mine. Give him my warmest regards." It is, well, having said that, we went through that the last 4 years. Yet again, we managed not only to keep the US-Greek relations at the same level, but really bringing them into an all-time high. Please allow me to remind you that I was able to sign the first amendment of the MDCA agreement with Mike Pompeo in October 2019, during the Trump presidency. And the friendship of President Erdogan and President Trump was there. But it was that exact treaty that mentioned Alexandroupolis, which infuriated President Erdogan, and he went open criticizing the treaty just 1 month after we have signed it.
The 3+1 platform was initiated under Trump.
A lot of initiatives in the Eastern Mediterranean were initiated during the first Trump presidency. I'm not saying by that we are working in a rose garden. That's not what we're expecting. But I'm saying that just the fact that President Trump is the new president-elect of the United States does not mean that the equilibrium between Greece and Turkey versus the superpower will change.
A strong angle in US-Greek relations is defense. How will we invest in it? You referred to Alexandroupolis. You said that you don't think that its role is going to be degraded because of a possible solution in Ukraine. But how can we further invest in this angle of our relationship with the US?
Well, we're very much connected with the United States defense establishment. Most of our Air Force, with the exception of the Mirage and the Rafale planes, comes from the United States. We are part of the F-35 program. The F-35 is the most modern stealth fighter in the world now, with a potential exception of F-22, but that is not exported. We are becoming part of the new Constellation frigate program with the United States. The Constellation is going to be the new frigate of the United States Navy. And last year we signed an agreement according to which we will study together the configuration and the specification of this frigate, and part of those frigates will be constructed in Greece for our own use, but also we will be able to service the United States vessels in the future. There's hundreds of programs between us and the United States. And allow me to say, without pretending that I'm a Trump follower, that at the same time, Greece was not happy on some issues with the Biden administration, although President Biden is a friend of Greece. Many times I have heard him with my own ears calling himself Bidenopoulos. But having said that, there was the Blinken letter with which Greece was promised 3 LCS frigates, a number of tanks, a number of C-130s, etc., etc. Nothing from that letter has materialized, although 2 years have passed.
It's obvious that you're not satisfied with the so-called Blinken package.
No, I'm not. And I said it openly to Kathimerini 3 weeks ago. I mean, that didn't make my American friends any happier, but the truth has to be openly said. We are friends, but yet again, we have interest, and we have to keep our words. We have always delivered what we have been asked from the United States within the boundary of our national interests, of course. The United States have also, they are the superpower, of course, but that does not exonerate them from the obligation to deliver what they have told us in writing and what they have signed.
Any benefit for the Greek industry? I mean, the Greek industry is part of your 2030 agenda. So,
you mean
any particular benefit for us?
It is. You mean in our relation with the United States? Well, what we're doing, we have for Greek standards, we have a rather huge program in Greece. Partly because for the years of the crisis, 2010 to 2019, there was practically zero investment in our defense. In order to keep up our present capabilities, Greece needs 2 billion per year on defense. So if you multiply 2 by 10, means we lack 20 billion of investment in our defense. We are trying to catch up now. We are investing 2 billion per year, but that does not cover the 20 billion that are missing from the past. Having said that, 2 billion per year is an enormous amount for the Greek taxpayer. Now, there is a rule in the Ministry of Defense. We judge every program, among others, by the rate of the investment in the Greek industry. For example, we are part of the Constellation program with the United States exactly because the ships are going to be constructed in the Greek shipyards, and exactly because the United States has promised that we will service their ships as well, the ships of the fleets of the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. So in each particular program, what is being invested in the Greek defense industry is a very, very serious issue for us.
Last question. Trump has shown that he can communicate effectively with authoritarian leaders, Erdogan being one of them. If a crisis erupts between Greece and Turkey, do you expect the US to get involved, and in which direction?
Oh, if only I knew. Well, again, I was part of a management team that dealt with very, very serious crisis with Turkey under the previous Trump administration in 2020, 2021. And as some of you may remember, we came that close from a real conflict. You may remember when the Greek frigate literally entered the helipad of a Turkish frigate. And if it was not for the two captains' ability to disengage and keep their nerves, we may have had, a very bad accident between the two countries, to put it very mildly. And avoid using the word war. At that time, I have to say openly that Mike Pompeo was always available, answering his cellular phone, and ready to offer his best services to the two countries in order to de-escalate. And always he was giving me the impression that I was speaking to a friend. And when I needed to see him, because there were things that need to be told that could not be said in a phone, he was in Vienna, he invited me to Vienna, he stopped his visit, and he spent an hour to listen to me and do his best in order to help the escalation between us and our neighbors. I do sincerely hope that Secretary Rubio and the future Secretary of Defense, whoever may be, may have a similar approach to the problems of our region. But again, I would like to conclude with my previous remark. We have to be able to defend our own. That is a constitutional obligation for any government in this country, but also that is our ticket for survival.
Well, it's a cliché when you have a minister to say that it's an honor and a pleasure to have him with you. But in our case, you were frank. I'm going to be as frank and honest. And thank you very much. It was a great pleasure and an honor for us to have you with us. And thank you for your insightful remarks. I would like to thank our audience, of course, our students mainly, for attending. And maybe... why not? Yeah, okay. Let's say 1 or 2 questions from students. Sorry for that to my colleagues, but they have the priority. Yes, if you can introduce yourself and pose the question, raise the question.
Hello, Minister Dένδιas. Thank you for being here. My name is Angelos Kalokaragiannis. I'm a history major and former president of the student government here, so thank you very much. You have mentioned numerous times in your speech that we should focus mostly on being able to defend ourselves, whether this has to do with the European Union, whether this has to do with bilateral relations with Turkey, or the US, or any other country. So I recently heard about what Deputy Minister Syrigo said about the Israeli component in the triangle of relations between Greece, Turkey, and the Trump administration. And since we have a very strong and solid relationship with them, how possible is it that both the Israelis and the United States can enhance the rearmament process of the Hellenic armed forces?
Well, we have, again, a very close... Thank you so much for the question. We have a close relation with Israel also on the armament sector. Israel is almost a high-tech superpower, and it may teach us some lessons on that field. Because Israel is a 400 billion economy, which is almost double our own, but is one of the biggest exporting high-tech powers in the world. And the system we have initiated now in the ministry by creating a research entity called DELCAC really copies the Israeli example of how Israel became a high-tech exporter. So we are very much looking to their know-how. We buy arms from them, especially specialized items, because they're substantially cheaper than the United States. But I'm mainly looking forward to get from Israel 2 things. A, know-how, and B, investment from Israel to Greece on the defense sector. As it was said before, and I'm happy I heard it, we have done well on the investment sector, but not closely as well as we should do. I used to say that Greece lacks north of 100 billion of investments in order to create the necessary growth to come closer to the European average. Israel, on the defense sector, is a target which we have approached, and we are very hopeful that it will materialize in investing in our country.
Final question? Yes? The gentleman?
So, I'm Elias Panaikas, a finance major. Thank you very much for being here. And it was mentioned that we are working very closely with the US on various programs, but also it was mentioned that we need to take care of ourselves and our European allies. Do programs such as the European Patrol Corvette and other developing programs will interest Greece in participating and expanding in the European initiatives in the defense sector?
Yeah. Greece is trying to participate. Thank you so much for your question, sir. Greece is trying to participate as much as possible also in the European defense programs. Our flagship program is the European Corvette, which is in starting point. As we're doing the frigate program, the Constellation program with the United States, we're doing a similar program for the European Corvette with France, with Germany, with Spain. We are studying how we would create a next generation Corvette. Corvette is a ship that is slightly smaller than a frigate, but with almost equal fighting capabilities, and it would be potentially much more useful in the environment of the Aegean, because being smaller is able to navigate in a better way among the thousands of islands we have there. But this is the top of the iceberg. ELCAC is participating in more than 37 research projects which are being funded by the European Union. And we do hope that if what President von der Leyen has promised in funding defense research program materializes, we are in a very good position to participate in almost everything that the European Union is going to finance as answers for the defense challenges of the next generation in Europe. That is why we needed this research center, ELCAC, so much. Again, all this is conditional. Conditional on funding, but mostly conditional on the European societies understanding that survival is not a free ticket, that they have to invest and they have to spend and they have also to provide innovative answers on the problems of today. One example of how late we have been. Late as Greece, but late as Europe. It is at least an oxymoron to see Turkey being one of the major exporters of drones in the modern world. It is, and it becomes even worse, because the professor of Mr. Bayraktar, by the way, was a Greek. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Another question that we can take, Filippo. Last but not least.
Thank you, Minister. My name is Filippo Nicolaos Olasakis. I'm a senior here doing international relations. My question for you is quite simple. Now, looking at the Russia-Ukraine war, we see a mixture of World War I tactics, artillery barrages, trench warfare, with a mixture of high domain, multifaceted, let's say, technological warfare capabilities, drones, thermal vision, night vision goggles, etc. My question to you is simply, how is the Hellenic Armed Forces trying to modernize its drone capabilities? It's a follow-up as well to the Baker Tower mentioned, specifically mentioning suicide drones. Now we see with the Cornet missile system that the Russians are using and the Shaheeds that they're getting from the Iranians. Is Greece or any other European member state trying to put forward the program to, say, mass produce such kind of drone capabilities? Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I have to say I'm surprised for your naming certain weapons, which is rarely the case, at least in your generation. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Well, I was late. You know that, and I'm sorry. But there was a reason I was late. The reason that I was late was that I was explaining to the representatives of the parties, ahead of our tomorrow's hearing in the relevant committee of the Greek Parliament, our new structure of the armed forces. And why I'm saying that? Because that new structure of the armed forces, I believe, will bring the armed forces of our country to the next generation, to the 21st century. If I were able to show you, you would see that every bit of those changes have to do with modern technologies that some of which you have mentioned. We cannot survive if we don't reform aggressively. We are late. We have studied very thoroughly the Ukrainian battlefield. Also, the United Kingdom was good enough to help us on this partly. Team of officers from the UK came and gave seminars to our officers. The Brits are very good observers of the Ukraine war. And also, we are taking from NATO lessons learned, and we are absorbing them as fast as we can. We have named it Agenda 2030. That is the big reform of the Greek armed forces in order to address the challenges you were kind enough to mention just before.
Thank you, Minister. I think we are done. Thank you for your patience.